Hey guys, welcome to a new movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about a Disney film from the 1980s that's called Flight of the Navigator. This film is not really super well known. I mean, I guess there's been talks of a remake eventually happening for this movie, even though that news has kind of been halted for a while. But I finally got around to seeing the original Flight of the Navigator from Disney. I guess it's based on a short story of some kind. And in this movie, you guys, it's about a boy that he's living in the 70s and he um, has this dog that he's been trying to train for this frisbee tournament, and they keep losing. His family is pretty ordinary. They live out in Florida, I think, somewhere. And then one day, while he's trying to retrieve his brother, who's over at his friend's house, they're both in this forest, and the brother kind of pulls this bad prank on the brother. The brother's the lead character in the movie, and somehow he falls over in this forest in this like little ditch area, and it's kind of more dark than usual in this forest. And the brother wakes up, and when he gets to what he thought was his house, it turns out to be 8 years into the future, and his family has since moved to a different house, and he doesn't know, why it's been 8 years. How come, nobody waked him up or anything like that. And so, his family's trying to figure things out. They're trying to figure out why he hasn't aged, why he looks exactly the same as the day that he got lost in the forest with his younger brother. And so, after a series of events and after trying to put the pieces together, and after NASA coming to this family, telling them that this boy has imagery within his head somehow. How they know that, I don't really know, and the film doesn't really explain it too well. But he has this imagery in his head of a spacecraft that's been recently discovered through NASA that they're trying to figure out. They don't know how to open it, they don't know how to examine it, and so forth. So they bring this boy in, they tell him they're going to give him this room, that they're going to give him as much food as he wants, all this neat technology, that he'll be assisted by this character played by Sarah Jessica Parker, who will assist him in any way that he feels like he needs to. And so they do these tests on him, and for some reason he's the only guy that can get into this spacecraft. And so a new adventure begins for him, where he gets to learn about the spacecraft, how come he hasn't aged over the course of 8 years. And so all these questions hopefully get answered over the course of this film. So overall, guys, Flight of the Navigator, it ended up being a film that I liked in parts, but for the most part, how I overall felt about this movie, I wasn't super impressed. I really was not. Um, there really wasn't a part of this film where I completely fell in love with what I was looking at. This is just a film that it happens to have a good idea spread around it every once in a while, but on the overall product, I really was not too happy with the movie. So for my positives and negatives of this film, I think the special effects in this film are pretty reasonable. This film came out in 1986. When the boy travels into the future 8 years later, it takes place in 1986 then. And I think the special effects work for the most part. They hold up reasonably well. Back to the Future, E.T., the original Star Wars trilogy, all those films are already around by then. And those films, I think, are much more impressive special effects wise compared to that film was when this came out, too. It holds up for the most part. There's some things that are like, okay, that's kind of dated, but special effects wise, it's pretty reasonable. The shots too, where the boy's in this navigator spaceship, and we see him up in the sky and flying through fields and flying through oceans and stuff. Those shots look really neat. Those shots you can definitely tell were probably the more expensive part of the production. The part of the production where they had to put a lot of thought and time into what exactly the shot would look like and so forth. So the navigation shots really look good in this movie. Whenever the boy is flying the spacecraft with this little robot creature that Paul Rubens voices in the movie, I think those shots look really good. It really feels like a more fun film when those scenes are happening. So those navigation shots really feel fun in this movie. The character played by Paul Rubens, or voiced by him at least, his name is Max. I kind of like how his character is very serious at first, and then this boy kind of turns him into a goofy character for the right reasons. He teaches him how to laugh and so forth. So I liked that Max character. It was fun. I could definitely see why Disney wanted Paul Rubens to voice him. Um, probably one of the more fun characters in this movie. I also like the feel and features of the spacecraft. It really feels like a spacecraft that a lot of kids would want to enter if they were given an opportunity to enter a spacecraft. The features seem neat. I like the look and feel of the spacecraft when this boy sits down and takes control of it and so forth. So the parts where he's in the spacecraft or kind of into this thing, the story kind of halts to let us explore this ship with the boy and everything. I thought that part was fine. So as far as the spacecraft goes, really had no complaints with the actual spacecraft in the movie. But for my negatives of Fly the Navigator, one huge negative I have is we really don't get to spend a lot of time with the spacecraft. Unfortunately, any scene you might have saw in the trailer or in screenshots for this film um, really are, where he's like in this actual spacecraft. Those really only happen within like the last 40 minutes of the movie. So, and even in that last 40 minutes, there's a lot of times where he goes out of the spacecraft. He has complaints with the little robot guy in it. He, leaves it to go back into the storyline of the movie and so forth. We really don't spend a lot of time with the spacecraft. I think that's something where Fly the Navigator really fell short for me. Is for being called Fly the Navigator, we really don't get to fly around with this navigator as much as we wish we could. And my other negative is the story really doesn't go anywhere. It's a film that, for all its ideas, for all its directions it takes, it really doesn't go anywhere. It really feels like two films going on at once. One film about a boy trying to figure out what happened over the course of 8 years while he was away and so forth, and the other with him flying the spacecraft that we really don't get to spend a lot of time with. The story just really goes nowhere, and that's really too bad. And like I was saying earlier, the film really does feel like something that would be two different films at once. I think the whole thing about the boy being, lost 8 years and trying to catch up with everybody and trying to catch up with his family, I think that could have been its own film. And I think the whole thing with him being able to fly the spacecraft and no one else on Earth knowing how to do it and so forth, I think that could have been its own film as well. It really feels like two different short films going on at once, and unfortunately, neither film feels complete. And my other complaint with the movie is very little feels resolved. By the time the film is over with, the problems that the boy had with the spacecraft doesn't really feel resolved. Um, how we reach the conclusion of the movie doesn't really feel resolved too well. It feels like there's a lot of things missing that we should know about and stuff. And the whole thing about him being gone for 8 years really just kind of pushed away after a while. Like nobody really acknowledges it after a while. So really, very little feels resolved in the movie. This is also a very weird film. Whenever the boy's on the spacecraft and he's meeting little creatures that this robot guy has come in interaction with on his travels in the galaxy and so forth, it's very weird. The little creature that here I think is on the cover, yeah, he is. The little creature that's in the spacecraft that the boy kind of is intrigued by the most. Really not a very interesting character. I can definitely tell Jim Henson or someone of that talent was not involved with this movie. Very much like a B list or C list. Puppeteering staff was hired for this movie. Really just weird. That's the best way I can put it. It's weird. It's not bad. It's not well developed or thought out or anything. It's just weird. So, yeah, the film loses points for being almost too weird at times. There's also a lot of one dimensional characters in this film. The father character in this film feels like the father character you'd see in every film. So does the mother character. So does the brother character. There's a very, very brief, and I'm talking like no more than 5 minutes, love interest for this boy in this movie. Very, very brief. They kind of completely forget about this character by the time the whole being lost in the forest thing happens and so forth. Just too many one dimensional characters, and I really didn't feel invested in anybody too much. So overall, Fly the Navigator, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. It has good ideas. There's little sparks of a good movie every once in a while, but unfortunately the story doesn't go anywhere. It feels like two films at once. Nothing really feels resolved. It gets a little too weird at times, and there's just too many one-dimensional characters and just not enough time in that spacecraft to really feel invested in what's going on in this movie. So 6.5 out of 10. I really can't recommend this movie, unfortunately. So Fly the Navigator, if you see it cheap like I did, I found it at Walmart for like $5, I think. Really not worth your time and money, unfortunately, even for $5. So if you're interested in seeing it, I guess go ahead, but I really was not too impressed with the movie.